Editing mistakes ruin many wildlife photos, but fixing them is easier than you think. I've reviewed hundreds of viewer-submitted images recently and keep spotting simple mistakes that cause big problems. In this video, I'll critique 3 of them and show you exactly how to fix them using techniques I've developed over nearly 2 decades of editing wildlife photographs. If you'd like a chance to have your photo critiqued in a future video, just sign up using the link below and I'll send you all the information. I've got this first image here submitted by Steve Wells. I'm going to first review the raw file and then go through the editing that he applied to the image. Now, the first thing I noticed with this image is the horizon seems quite skew, so that does need to be rotated. We've also got our subjects in dark shadow. Now, if you zoom out to 6%, let's just turn this mask off here. If you look at that image, what is the subject when you look at this image quite small? Now, obviously, it's very hard to determine what the subject of your image is when you look at it that small. But the thing to remember here is your eye is naturally drawn to very bright areas of the image. So looking at this thumbnail now already small, I'm drawn to the background of the image. Now, if you do zoom in, you do see the subject, but essentially what you want to do is draw the eye in through brightening effects or adjustments. And in this image now, we need to focus on the brightening of the subjects and try and darken the background somewhat. So that's one of the issues here with this image. Now, in the background, we have got this almost man-made structure in the background there, which unfortunately is impossible to take away. So we're just going to ignore that for now. Underneath the belly of this right-hand animal here, there is that little bright patch, so we could choose to darken that very specifically. I feel like the main issue with this image, however, is just trying to brighten up the subject and also then rotate the image just so it feels a little bit more balanced. In terms of the composition, I think there is a little bit of dead space here. It's not really adding much to the scene, and to bring more focus into the subject, I think we can crop in a little bit more. But let's have a look and see what Steve did on the edit. Now, I really like what he's done here. He's managed to, especially, let's have a look at the raw file and zoom into 100%. He's managed to bring back detail nicely in that very bright area there. As you can see, he's harnessed some editing techniques I cover in my photo editing course to really keep those very bright areas in check there. He's also gotten rid of quite a lot of the noise, ISO 6400, and in the edited version, it's really nice and clean. And as you can see, he has corrected the horizon level here. It's looking a lot more natural and balanced. And he actually has cropped in quite a bit of the image from the right-hand side to get rid of that dead space. So for me, this composition works really well. I really like what he's done with darkening and also warming up the background area there. That was bringing a lot of attention to me when I zoomed out to 6% in the raw file. Now let's zoom out to 6% here. You can easily see now those subjects definitely stand out a bit more. So through editing, it's really helped sort of bring back the main interest in the image. Now, if I had to really critique this image, I would say there's 2 areas that can be improved on. I would say this very bright area on top of the animal here is a bit distracting, as well as this one here. So what I would do is I would simply just go and create a small brush mask. I'm simply just going to paint over that area. I might just drop down the highlights and maybe just desaturate that area slightly. Also, the eye is drawn to very warm areas as opposed to very cool areas. So by cooling that area down and by darkening it, you're taking a little bit of interest away from that area. Now, obviously, I would refine that selection a bit better. As you can see, we're just trying to take away a little bit of attention from that area. And then again, at the bottom here, going to create a new brush. And I might just darken that very, very slightly. Not a lot. You don't want to make it look highly unnatural, but just a very subtle adjustment there, in my opinion, definitely does help. You can see there's the 2 areas without the editing applied, and we've applied the editing there. I would need to clean up those selections a bit better, but you can see the impact that small adjustments like that do have on the image. I would perhaps also increase a little bit more of the shadows and maybe a bit more of the blacks, just to bring in a little bit more exposure to the darker areas. And then this next idea is highly subjective, and it might not work for everybody, but I feel like when the main subject of the image has a lot of color, and in this example, the animals have a lot of that very nice red color, it's almost competing for attention with the trees in the background especially, and on the right-hand side here. So I may choose to desaturate some of those competing colors. And especially in the foliage, I would perhaps desaturate the yellows and the oranges. So let's go to color mix and try it out. I'm going to select some of these very bright areas here just to desaturate them a bit. Not take away all of the color and the impact of the nice color in the image, but just slightly desaturating them just to take a little bit of attention away, so the attention falls mainly on the subject. Let's drop the saturations of the greens just to see what that does. I like what it's doing. I might just drop it only very slightly. And this is the edit as it was. And just by desaturating some of those yellows and the greens and by darkening those two areas above the animal, I feel like we've just slightly increased the attention on the subject. Again, that's a very highly subjective topic about the color, but it's something you can try just to try and highlight your subject a little bit more. Let's have a look at this next image by Ashley Morris. This is quite an interesting photograph, and it definitely portrays the essence of what a leopard is about. It's a very elusive, shy animal. So through the use of the wood in the foreground, it kind of portrays that. But this is quite difficult to edit because it's quite a graphic shape in front of the leopard that could be distracting. Let's just evaluate this image and just highlight a few key areas that we need to look out for. I would say the back of the tail is very distracting. If we zoom out to 6.3 again, you can see that definitely catches my eye there. The bottom right-hand corner is also catching my eye. So those are two areas, just add a brush here to highlight that. Two areas I would definitely look at. A lot of this right-hand side of the image is also a bit of dead space, so we might crop away some of that. And that will help us draw in more attention to the leopard. I would definitely perhaps use some vignetting to this, darkening the outside of the image, just to help draw emphasis to the leopard's face there. But apart from that, the image is not noisy at all. It's ISO 1250, so that's really fine. And the image looks nice and sharp, so there's no issues there. But let's have a look at what Ashley did with the edit. And there we go. Ashley definitely has cropped away a lot of the parts of the area on the right-hand side, added some nice vignetting to this image. And I think through the vignetting, it's also darkened the tail of the leopard quite nicely. Now, if you zoom out to 6.3, what now is distracting? You can almost notice the vignette. I think the darkening effect might be a little bit too strong for this image. It's looking slightly unnatural. If you look at the background here, which is at the same distance to the background in that small gap there, you can notice it's quite dark. So what I would maybe do is just lessen the effect of the radial gradient. So I'm simply just going to add another radial gradient here, invert it. It's going to increase some of the exposure slightly, just like that. We do have a little bit of black clipping details here, but that's not important because there's no details in nice out of focus areas. So for me, that's not really an issue. Apart from brightening that vignette, there's not much else I could suggest for this image. You could, to try draw in more attention to the leopard, increase the saturation on the leopard and decrease some of the saturation on the greens. So let's try that. Let's go to color mixer, increase the saturation on the animal's face here by choosing that orange color and perhaps just desaturating some of the green. That could work. We could try some extra color grading in the very blue areas here. Let's darken that slightly. Just going to increase the balance amount. I just want to add this effect really only into the very dark areas. We could try that. But in my opinion, there's not much else you could do. Unfortunately, the log is quite a bold feature in the image, but I think because the log is fairly desaturated in color and the leopard is fairly saturated, I think this image does work. So that's Ashley's edit, and these are the small adjustments I've applied to it. But again, there's not much I could almost add to this to increase the potential or impact of this image. Let's have a look at this third image by Kies Kreifeld. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And let's start by evaluating this image. If you zoom out to 6.3%, there's a very bold line in this image, and that is not the subject. The subject is obviously the bird on that perch there. So that is one area which needs attention. That branch there is very distracting. There's a small little distraction there at the bottom, and the background is fairly bright, and the subject is relatively darker than that. So we need to almost create an inverse effect of what the background is doing in relationship to the bird. I want to darken the background and lighten the bird. I like the color in the image. The detail is fine. Let's have a look at the editor file, and this is what we have here. The background is still fairly bright, but what I like is the distracting branch has been cropped out, and a lot more of the image has been cropped out to draw more attention to the bird. If you look at the raw file, the bird is quite small in the frame, and through cropping, we've definitely added a bit more impact into this image. Now, in terms of the editing, how could we improve this? There are a few suggestions I would make to this image. The first one has to do with the background. The background is quite bright. I don't want to darken the background, but what I would do is create a vignette here. So I'm going to, instead of using the effects like this, I don't want the vignetting effect to be applied to my subject. And I'm going to do that by first selecting my subject, and that's done a pretty good job of selecting what I want. I'm going to then subtract a linear gradient. I want to fade the mask from the bottom right to the top left, just fading that area of the branch away from my selection. What I'm then going to do is I'm going to invert this entire mask and then intersect this with a radial gradient. I want to only affect the outside of the area we haven't selected. I'm going to drag that over the image, going to invert this mask here. That's now going to select the background. And then what I can do is I can add any effect to my vignetted area. I'm going to drop the exposure slightly, maybe decrease the highlights a little bit. Actually, I might just drag this radial gradient down to affect more of the top of the image. You can see there's a very bright portion there. Just by dragging that down, we are darkening that very top. It's almost just completing the image nicely there and letting the subject stand out quite nicely. I like that the background is quite blue. So what I want to do now is I want to slightly warm up my subject. So I'm going to click Select Subject and just add a small bump in white balance and a little bit of the tint just to try and offset that subject a bit better from that background there. What I might do is just tidy up the color of the blue in the background. I feel like it's quite saturated. Let's just desaturate it very slightly. Not a lot. And I might change the hue of the blue. I think the blue is very close to a more purple color than it is to a very subtle blue color. So I'm just going to slightly just change the hue of that blue. So very slight adjustments, but I think aesthetically, I think it works well. It just simplifies the background's color palette a little bit more in terms of what's presented on the bird. And I think to add a little bit more stylistic aesthetic to this image, I'm going to just add some color grading. Now bear in mind, I'm editing a JPEG file here, so you don't have the full latitude of editing flexibility that you would have in a RAW file, but basic adjustments like this are okay. And I might then just add a small bump in vibrance. This is the submitted edit, and this is the image with my suggestions. You can see it's created a little bit more attention on the subject, just helping it stand out a little bit more. Showing you the mistakes photographers make is a great way to learn editing, but the best way to improve is by seeing all the skills in action, which you can do here in this full Lightroom edit.